Good afternoon, everyone. Campbell McCrary here, Amvest Capital in New York City. Welcome to the Amvest Capital Inc. live webinar with Viper Minerals Corp. Viper trades on the venture as VIPR and on the OTCQB as VIPRF. Do hope you'll enjoy today's program. It will also be available in replay mode about an hour after we wrap up. And you can get an advanced copy at amvestcapital.com/webinars. A key component of our work here in webinar land is the questions that you send in. So please find your way to the question pane of the control panel and send in some good questions, and we'll ask them along with our line of questions as well. As you know, Amvest is a New York-based specialist investment management and corporate finance firm focused solely on the natural resource sector. All important disclaimer, this call is for informational purposes only. Very pleased to have with us today Steve Cope, who is the CEO and director of Silver Viper. 12 plus years experience in the mining sector, corporate development at Orco Silver, Barzili Minerals, Orex, Timmins Gold. He's has a skill set coming from financing, project evaluation, IR, M&A. He's done it all. Again, please send in your questions, and with that, we'll pass it over to you, Steve, and understand you have some exciting and important transformational news. So tell us, what is it?
Yeah, thanks, Campbell. Yeah, it's very exciting for us as a company. We've been doing, these webinars for a time, and those of you that have been following and listening know the major catalyst that was coming, or major milestone, and that is the maiden resource on the La Virginia project. So we're definitely going to be discussing that today, discussing a lot of the impact of that resource and where we're going to go from here as a company. I will be making some forward-looking statements, so I'll draw your attention to this slide. The Silver Viper right now has a single asset in the company. It's the La Virginia project. That's obviously the project that we've just brought out that maiden resource on. It went public during market yesterday, so it's definitely fresh off the presses. That resource is broken down between our discovery that was made at the El Rubi portion of the project and the historic area that was found by mine finders when they were exploring on the project. I'll give a bit of a brief background on the project for those that aren't as familiar with it, but this project was mine finders' #1 exploration project when they were bought by Pan American Silver in 2013 for $1.5 billion. What mine finders had done is go and try and fly this entire mountain range looking for another Dolores mine, which was their flagship mine that's still in operation today within Pan American's portfolio. And they settled on La Virginia being the lookalike for Dolores. This particular trend in Sonora and in Mexico is highly underexplored. It sits up in the Sierra Madre Mountains. And what we had here is you have Dolores 100K to our south, and the El Tigre deposit, which is a past producing mine, 90K to the north, and no modern deposits in between whatsoever. A lot of that range is harder to access. There aren't as many roads. We're very lucky where we are that we've got good infrastructure and easy access up into the mountains. So we got to work on this thing in 2018 and haven't looked back. We inherited the project with a database of over 50,000 meters of drilling, 188 drill holes, but all of that work was focused on one very small portion of the project. And when we got involved, we saw that there was going to be lots of potential for additional discoveries. And that's what we did at the El Rubi discovery zone, which sits about 4 to 5 kilometers north of where the historic work was done. Lots of potential still on this project. Obviously, we just came out with the maiden resource, and now we work on expanding that resource for the next, version of that. We'll see how long it takes. We could see another one this year, or we could see it a year from now, but we'll be, racing to, expedite the drill program and grow the deposit as quickly as possible. We'll go further into detail on the resource and how we're going to do that later in the presentation. Another, staple and very important thing when you're looking at investing in a company like Silver Viper is the management and shareholder group behind it. Our team in the exploration space is second to none. We have, our geologists have over 150 years combined experience in the field. strong management team with a history of success. Our last big success was selling Orco Silver, which was a project that we put the first drill hole into and grew it to 270 million ounces in Durango, Mexico, and then sold it in a bidding war between Coeur and First Majestic for 350 million US. Very important to have major institutional ownership and support behind it. I believe we have about 20 different funds that own the stock, to my knowledge, if it's not more at this point. And again, a very nice low share count in the company. One of the staples of not only our company, but the other two companies that sit within our management group, which is known as the Belcara Management Group, is that management always has skin in the game. You can see it in our open market buying, participating on placements, but all three of the Belcara Group companies, management owns over 20% of the outstanding stock. The project is located about 220 kilometers east of Hermosillo. You take a paved highway to the local town of Geclegical. From there, it is about 30 minutes in on a well-kept gravel and dirt road. You are getting up into the mountains here, but one of the benefits you'll see moving forward, especially in the El Rubi area, is we sit, that part of the deposit sits on a flat plateau. So very favorable for open pit mining. And being up on a plateau, actually, it's even more favorable because we won't have a pit wall on the southern side or part of the western side of that pit. We do have a power line corridor that goes right through the project, which is a huge infrastructure thing when you're getting up here into the mountains that most deposits will not have, but they just recently installed a power line corridor that runs from that town in Geclegical and connects to the next town down the road of Mesa Tres Rios. We have water year round and we are environmentally permitted to work across the entire deposit. As far as I'll quickly touch on this is our claims package as it sits now. All of the historic work was done down there on those blue claims on La Virginia, Convirginia, and Las Vatas targets. That's where the bulk of that historic portion of the resource come from. There's another target a little bit north of La Virginia called El Oriental, which I guess they put a couple holes into as well. But the bulk of it comes from Convirginia and Las Vatas. They were using large track mounted rigs at the time they were exploring on the project. They were bulldozing roads. It was more expensive exploration. And so that, they were having success there and that's where they focused. When we went and started looking at this project, what we saw was, a database that virtually had maybe a handful of samples on the entire northern half of the project, nothing in the El Rubi area. But we saw the same structures that run on surface to the historic area run north-south for tens and, up to 100 kilometers with outcropping as these large silicified dikes. They run in parallel to each other. And we said, there's going to be a very strong chance that we get involved and make additional discoveries on this project. We have an easier time getting into that northern part of the project because we're using man-portable drill rigs, much easier to move around. They work great. We've been drilling 500+ meter holes on the project and haven't had any problems with those drill rigs. So it's given us an opportunity to get into an area that never even saw sampling and go in and make a fairly, what I would consider a fairly major discovery right off the bat. As far as the option agreements go there, we gave Pan American a 2% NSR to get the entire ownership of everything that you see in those claims in red. That also gave us access to the historic database, all the physical core and pulps, which are stored in a warehouse in Hermosillo. And then on those blue claims, we struck a back-end loaded option agreement that you can see down there. We've made the first 2 payments. Again, that final payment would be the one big payment, and half of that can be paid in shares at our discretion. Here you can see, this is important, this is a new picture that we've just recently put into the deck, and it gives you a good idea of what that flat plateau at El Rubi looks like down here in the bottom image. Our discovery hole, you can see, again, I described those silicified dikes, and you can see a major one sticking out of the ground there right at the start of the plateau coming up from the arroyo. And our discovery hole was made adjacent to that particular dike on the eastern side of it. Since then, we've been expanding the deposit down the arroyo and obviously further to the north up on top into the plateau. That particular deposit in the resource sits at about 500 meters of strike length. It can be as wide as 250 meters and down as deep as 300 meters in that particular part. Our resource at the El Rubi area is only open pit at the moment, though you'll see that we have some pretty nice high grade material below that pit. And part of our exploration work this year will be expanding and hopefully coming up with a first underground resource to go with hopefully what's an expanding open pit resource in the El Rubi area. Just a little bit here on some of the mapping that we've done, looking at kind of moving forward what we're going to be looking at. The northern side of the El Rubi resource sits in this kind of yellow area, at the start of this yellow area here, and we're actually interpreting that as a down drop block. So our drill holes that went in there previously would have been very high in the system. So our work going forward into this campaign and later this year, we'll be testing that as a down drop block, similar to what we saw on the southern end of El Rubi when we were, our what's been the best hole on the project in hole 289, and that particular section was a down drop block. So we're going to be very much looking to expand on the resource to the north, and then also, as you see moving forward, we're going to be expanding it to the south as well. This gives you an idea of kind of the host rocks and how they sit in this particular area. Here we have the rhyolite package to the west. On top of that, we have the andesite flows agglomerate system, and this has been the area that maintains the highest grades and best widths. It just tends to be a rock that allows for the fluids when they were being mineralized to boil and blow out along weaker fractures. You see the western zone labeled here. This is our very broad low-grade zone that really started to show the open pit potential of this part of the deposit. In that western zone and the drill holes that have gone through it, and we're seeing 100-meter wide plus intercepts that are running at 0.8 to over a gram, up to maybe 1.5 grams gold equivalents. And then as we move to the east, you get to the main El Rubi structure, which is a breccia structure with stockwork veining in it, but it's the mineralization is hosted in that breccia structure itself. It's not a traditional vein like you'll see in other parts of Mexico when you're looking at these low sulfidation epithermal systems. It's a breccia structure. And the unique thing about that is the obvious lookalike to it is actually Dolores, which is what they came looking for on this deposit. They didn't find El Rubi or exploring it. Where they were exploring in the south was interesting, but it wasn't quite the same lookalike that we have up in this El Rubi section for that Dolores mine. And it's the same. It has these breccia structures that host mineralization with stockwork quartz veining running throughout them. As you move further up, you can get into the andesite, the further into the andesite package, and then up into the upper volcanics. But our high-grade mineralization on that El Rubi structure, as far as this portion here, tends to stop right on that El Rubi structure boundary, and then our low-grade broad stuff tends to be in the footwall. There are potential for other parallel systems further to the east. We've identified one that sits about 2 kilometers to the east, so it isn't just a one singular target area here at El Rubi that we're focused on that has potential to host mineralization. Here you can see the man-portable drill rigs that we've been using. It's been great for us. We're environmentally permitted to drill all over the project. We reuse all that lumber pad by pad. Within a couple weeks of us drilling there, we throw some seed down, and you can't even tell that we were ever drilling there other than the drill collar that's left. So Semernet, the group that does that permitting process in Mexico, they love us for it. It's a very low headache for them, and again, we're permitted and have been permitted to drill all over the entire project. As far as land access here, oftentimes in Mexico you deal with ejido. That's not the case here. Here we're dealing with private ranchers, and within the 2 main ranches that that we deal with, we have great relations with. We've got land access agreements in place with them. They've been very supportive of our efforts. Obviously, they're cheering for us to find a mine, because what that would mean economically for the area and for them, on their property. We've got water year round. In the case here, there's a creek that runs year round at the bottom of the arroyo below where this machine is, but there's multiple creeks that run year round and provide water for camp and various other parts of the project where we're drilling. I won't spend too much time on this slide. This is highlighting mostly the high grades. I mean, we can go, you'll see kind of what that's resulted in, but again, a lot of this is on that main El Rubi structure, and as we continue to go deeper and start to grow an underground resource on the El Rubi area, that's where we'll start to see the higher grades and that you'll see pick up versus our very broad low-grade open pit heap leach resource, which we have right now. Here you can see the outline of the pit, and as it sits within our map geology program here, you can see I mentioned that yellow. It was kind of the northern end of that where we're in the colluvium, where we believe that that's a down drop block. So we're really going to be trying to test some of those theories and expand upon that. You can see some core here from within the El Rubi area. And what we're going to see here moving forward, you can see the BB line and the AA line. We're going to look at one long section, one cross section to give you an idea of kind of what the how the drilling is held together moving forward. Here you can see the resource, and you can see our pits that we've put on with our fresh new LiDAR information that we had to wait for over a year to get, which is what some of the delays were in our resource. But again, holding together very well. The addition of El Rubi has really allowed the independent to show, further open pit potential in that historic area than if it existed on its own. It is a steeper part of the project with the hills, so it is more favorable for open pit mining there, but having El Rubi already existing is definitely made that open pit side of the historic area more appealing as well. You can see terrain-wise again, kind of where the pit sits, coming down to that arroyo, so you're going to have a very small pit wall on this southern side and also on the western side as we continue to expand. We see, as far as this area here, potential for this to continue to expand down to the south. We've seen mineralization through some of our drill holes. It's already below the bottom of that arroyo. And then as you come back here and you can see this large gap that's about 3 kilometers long sitting between El Oriental and El Rubi, this is our Macha Libre area. And this is, again, we would be shocked if we don't end up finding another deposit potentially in that range. There's certainly lots of targets, and we're going to be exploring on those targets this year. Here you can see some of the grades from the various targets in the resource. Again, this was the maiden resource, so it's been done with a lot of very strict parameters put on it. You can see the capped grades there. One of the things that I think will happen as we get more information and start to expand on, the various categories, especially that El Rubi inferred category, is we can potentially see that grade increase as we get more confidence, or as the independent gets more confidence in the deposit in those particular areas. I know that one, for instance, the uncapped grade on that was sitting at about 1.6 grams gold, and the silver was much higher as well. So it's one of those things that, obviously capping is very good, and it's very important that we view these eyes through conservative lenses, but there is additional upside above and beyond these grades as well. But that being said, those particular grades that we see at El Rubi in both the indicated and inferred, as well as the rest of the deposit, are extremely good open pit heap leach grades. The average mine in that state, in the state of Sonora and around Mexico, that does heap leach mining operates about a 0.5 gram average grade. And here, when you're looking at this from gold equivalents, you're looking at well over 1 gram, if not higher. You've got a 0.5 gram gold equivalent there just in the silver number. So we're extremely excited about this resource, especially given the fact that our metallurgy has shown that this rock is leachable. We think this is just an amazing start. We've had, meetings with, other producers that the feedback has been very good. This really is, to me, setting itself apart from a lot of the other exploration companies out there and what they're offering right now as far as resources and open pit heap leach mining. This has vaulted itself up the list to a lot of the various producers as being something that they're keeping a very keen and close eye on. There isn't much in the resource right now in underground, just a little bit in the historic area. Again, that is going to change, I would assume, on subsequent resources as we continue to expand upon the various deposits. And you can actually see it here on this top image is the El Rubi pit, and you can see the blocks that are outside of our resource at the moment. And they're outside because there's not enough tons there to be included in an open pit or in an underground resource yet. But I know that in particular, those blocks right now are running at about 15 grams gold and 270 silver. So there's some very high grades there that aren't included in the resource, and those are the types of things that moving forward into this year, and we've already started on it with our drilling that was, after the data cutoff, but expanding those high grade targets deeper to start including in an underground resource as we build up the tons for that portion of it. You can see again where we do have a bit of an underground resource. You can see it in the historic area and how they sit relative to the pits at the various different targets in that historic area. The historic area, it's great and it's a nice little added bonus to everything. But again, all of our work is going to be focused around El Rubi and our surrounding anomalies, trying to expand on Macha Libre and make a discovery there, as well as some of the other targets, Ruby North, El Molino. Another target that we have called La Colmena that we just identified that's never been drilled. There's a lot of potential there. Here we are looking at that section AA that I said we'd be looking at. So this is one cross section in that El Rubi resource area. And this section contains that hole 289, which was the best drill hole to date on the project, where we had that high grade 19-meter wide zone down at the very bottom. You know, that had that half meter of 10,600 silver and 738 gold. So there's one of the things though that's really come up, that's when you're thinking of traditional epithermal systems in Mexico here, is that we have all this high grade right at surface, and then 300 meters further down we still have high grade gold and silver. And when you're looking at that traditional epithermal model, you know, that you would expect the gold numbers, at least if not the silver numbers, to actually start to come off as you move 300 meters down an epithermal system. And we're seeing them in any case maybe even get better. So one of the, again, a working theory that hasn't been proved out, but that we'll be testing, is that we may have another system here that we've stepped into as we move deeper, and it's not that we're moving into that, you know, base metal range that you necessarily would expect to see. I mean, we've, other than that one high grade sample, our base metals have been barely anomalous. So we think there's a lot of room and potential for this thing to expand a lot further as we go deeper, especially on this southern portion of El Rubi, where we're seeing some really nice looking rock. Here you can see, now this is the section BB, the long section, and how everything held together. And this gives you an idea really of how we're going to be trying to expand the deposit to the south. You can see where that, again, that high grade nice hit is down there right at the bottom of the pit. But as we got this about 300-meter wide gap before we get to some of the little drill holes that we saw that were down at the bottom of the Royal, that again, we don't think went deep enough now, as we're seeing kind of how this system is plunging and going deeper to the south. So we're going to systematically, like we have been doing, stepping out 50 meters at a time, and we're going to be looking to expand on, you know, this stuff that we're seeing at the edge here as far as the southern end of the pit. And, you know, hopefully by the next resource we'll have filled, well, we certainly will have filled in that 300 meters, and hopefully, you know, we'll have a nice healthy underground resource and an open pit that has grown. As you move north here, again, like I mentioned, we're looking at that as thinking that we're in a down drop block. So again, we want to be testing that deeper, and we think there's a strong chance that we start to pick up mineralization again in that area. One of the things that happens on this deposit is we have the large regional fault that runs north-south. That's the, you know, runs for hundreds of kilometers, and is certainly the controlling structure in the area. But we also have a lot of these cross-running faults that run east-west, and that fault where those east-west faults intersect kind of our dikes and our structure, we tend to have the best grades on sections. So the LiDAR is going to be invaluable moving forward now that we finally have it, for identifying some of those subtle structures that you don't necessarily see when you're walking on surface. And then you combine that with the geophysics that we've done and the geochem programs that we've run. And there's definitely going to be a lot of reworked models on portions of El Rubi that we think will be invaluable to continuing to expand the deposit. Another major important thing, and we mentioned it, is of course there's metallurgy. Here we have the samples that we sent off to the university in Hermosillo, and what we saw, you know, this was their first step of metallurgy, that silver mineralization was in acanthite or argentite, and we have gold and silver alloyed as electrum. After we saw that, you know, we didn't think there was going to be any problems with metallurgy, and then we did followed that up with some basic bottle roll tests. And again, it showed that the rock leaches very well. Gold recoveries from 90 to 95% across the various grade ranges, and silver from 62 to 76. And again, as we've done a resource and modeled kind of, you know, that bulk tonnage, low grade open pit, again, seeing silver recoveries down in those lower grades leaching at 76% is a fantastic sign of the potential, again, for the silver recoveries. That would be higher than what, again, most heap leach deposits are. But then, and then the gold recovery is still over 90%. And that is just on a first pass. We think we could vector in and get those percentages up as well. We mentioned a number of the names that you see on here, Macho Libre and Ruby North. This is overlaid over our geophysics image here. And you know what you see is you get that large arrowhead shape that you don't see from surface. And so that is a buried intrusion. And what's been interesting is how our geochem has lined up on the periphery of that buried intrusion. La Colmenas, it's a little off of it, but it's still sitting along that trend of the eastern side of that buried intrusion, and would sit in the same trend as the El Molino geochem anomaly. All of these are highly prospective for us to potentially find additional, El Rubies or other deposits as we move north and south on the deposit. And again, we'll see, we're going to be really working on filling in that gap between El Ruby and Macho Libre. And we really, there's a point there where the Macho Libre trend actually intersects the El Ruby trend. And I know Dale is very excited to test that and see what happens when those two structures come together. I mentioned our group, the Belcara group, and we've got Orex Minerals and Barcelli Minerals are the other two companies within our group. Being part of the group really gives us a huge advantage over most of our peer companies that are single company groups. This gives us the ability to afford to have 3 senior geologists here within the group on staff. They're very well known within the industry. The level of work and our reputation because of who we have working for us. Oftentimes the majors get involved with us at earlier stages. We've had multiple partnerships with Pan American Silver. We've got an active joint venture with Agnico Eagle. We've got an active joint venture right now with Pan American and with Fresnillo. We've partnered with Hecla. We sold Orco in a bidding war between Coeur and First Majestic. We've got a very good track record, and again, those groups don't get involved with you unless you are known for doing the right work, and that's our group's model. We pride ourselves on doing the right level of work. We don't rely on fluff marketing to inflate our market cap. We really want to grow organically from the results from the drill rig, making discoveries, and then ultimately selling our deposit to one of those major mining companies. We only get involved with projects that we believe have the size potential to attract the major miners. And for us, we want to see at least the potential for 1 million ounces gold equivalent or 100 million ounces silver equivalent. And we certainly see that on our deposits. Even if you ignore the historic area, we see that potential and more in the El Ruby area and the surrounding anomalies. Here you can see the share structure. Current prices are, unless something's changed since we started or at the close that I didn't see, but we're trading around the 55-cent mark. Been as high as 85 cents. I think, I think every company thinks this, but I think there's a strong case to be made that we are highly undervalued with this resource now, with the recent results we've had relative to our peer group, that have smaller resources, and I've seen some with double the market cap. So I think as news gets out and as people start to understand the resource and the significance of it for our company, I think you're going to see our stock get re-rated. I know the one analyst that we have cover us, at Red Cloud, upped his target today. I think his target went from $1 to $1.30 in the near term. And then again, we've got quite the major list of shareholders. Those are some of the names, but again, there's over 20 different funds that own the stock. You can see management and retail. And one of the things we've really been proud at, and I give Amvest and these webinars a lot of credit for it, is how our retail presence in the US has been growing. We've seen our OTCQB listing, the volumes increase here over the last couple of months. There's been a couple of other groups that have certainly been contributing to that, but we've been very happy with our partnership with Amvest, and these webinars in particular and the meetings that they've been setting up for us have been great for getting us attention within the US retail market. In summary, we got a high quality asset, a mining friendly jurisdiction, strong management team behind the company, lots of blue sky potential, and great shareholder support behind the group. I think now would be a good time to open it up for questions and discuss anything we want to talk about further.
Excellent. Just wait for the Amvest team to populate, but in the meantime, bunch of questions have been sent in. Thank you very much. Steve, primary reason Pan American walked away from the project?
They walked away because,
if that's the right word to use.
I don't think walked away isn't the right word, to be fair. What happened was Pan American turned back the internal claims in 2014 to the group that Minefinders had optioned it from, but sat on a large surrounding land package, all the data. But they liked the asset. They kept sitting on those claims. They were paying almost $750,000 a year in taxes to hold the claims the way they stood when they had them. And what they were doing, and what I think their plan was they would hope that internal Mexican group was going to own the internal claims where all the work had been done, was going to walk away and they would go back in and be able to stake it and make it whole again, or someone was going to have to come to them to do a deal. So when we were approached by that internal Mexican group, saying Pan Am won't even pick up the phone for us, we know that there was a bunch of good stuff done on this, but we don't have access to any of the data, can you help us bring this back together? And that's where we got involved. And it speaks a lot to our particular, I think in particular to our group and our relationship with Pan Am, that we were able to get it for what we did. But they do maintain that 2% NSR. And Michael, he told me, he said, if you grow this now to a size that we're interested, we'll be there and we'll come back in and we'll buy it from you. But Pan American doesn't do grassroots exploration. Their exploration teams are focused drilling around their existing mines, and they've always been one of the majors that understands that it's the juniors like us that make the discoveries and grow things to a size that, and de-risk them to a point where Pan American can then buy them. And so instead of having it sit on the shelf and paying taxes year over year for something that they were never going to do exploration work on, better to get something out of it from us. And then if we, and he's maintained that to this day, Michael. I think after our discovery hole, he said, "You are going to make me buy this back from you, aren't you?" So I don't think they walked away. I think they took a smaller interest by keeping that NSR, and are prepared, if we, as we grow this thing, to ultimately, if it gets to that point that it's Mexico's next mine or Pan American's next mine, then they'll step up and they will buy it back. But they were never going to do any work on it because it's not what they focus on.
And then someone just wrote in just a little clarification, a little help. The Pan American 2% NSR only on the red claims or also the blue claim blocks?
The Pan American NSR is on all of the claims. It is a project-wide NSR.
Okay. Is the initial acquisition cost approximately $300 per hectare reasonable in terms of other properties in the region?
No, I wouldn't base it on a per hectare basis. I think, it varies. When we did it, obviously gold and silver were at a very different place. I think that varies by how much work has been done on the project. Obviously, this one had a pretty extensive amount of work done in the historic area, but I would never pay per hectare. I feel like if something has a resource, you start talking about paying by the ounce.
Just the words that were used. Also, here's the perception. Why are the average grades of the typical drill intersections almost an order of magnitude higher than the average grades of the mineral resource? So a little bit of a question, a little bit of a statement. So
again, right off the bat, you have to remember, so we've done this, the high grades that people see obviously are the structure itself, and those are narrower intercepts relative to what is being included in an open pit. In an open pit, you're taking everything. So that they get diluted down in the pit portion because you're taking that as well as the waste rock and everything else that's sitting in there. But when you start looking at those broad, long intercepts, the resource is pretty in line with those 130 meter wide intercepts that we had on the western zone coming into the main Ruby structure, as well as the low grade halos. But the other thing that happens that you don't top cut your assays that go out in your news releases, but in the resource, and especially in early resource, they're pretty aggressively top cut to bring down, so you don't have those big high grade spikes affecting a resource, and then when you get time to mine it, it's all out of whack. So there's definitely a number of different contributing things that will affect that. But as we move to the underground side of doing the resource, you don't have that dilution and taking of that extra rock. You'll see the underground, as we start to define that at Ruby, you should see a much higher grade number associated with those.
And back to the NSR, can you buy it? You think you could buy that back?
We will not be able to buy back the NSR from Pan Am. We can buy back the NSR that was on the internal claims, and we have a right to buy that back for the life of the project on the internal claims with the private Mexican group. Okay. Pan Am typically sell their NSR to Mavericks. That's been there. They set up Mavericks. I think they own 40 or 50% of the outstanding stock, but they set that up as a way to basically cash out their NSRs into Pan American. But again, it wouldn't surprise me if we get to a point in the future and Pan American decides, if we keep growing this, that they want to get back involved and do something more significant on the project.
Thank you. I'm going to pass this call on to Amvest's new mining research group, Adam Graff, Senior Analyst, and Artie Curis, Associate, Mining Research, Amvest Capital. So, guys, maybe run some questions by Steve. Thank you.
Thanks, Campbell. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yep.
Yep.
Great. Steve, can you give us an idea of the width and the continuity of the El Rubi high grade structure as you go down and encounter it, you know, in an underground type scenario?
Yeah. Let's go back to, this is a good slide actually. You see, you know, Dale's drawn on here his projection of that El Rubi structure, and it, you know, until we started to get deeper on it there, it was averaging anywhere from 1 meter to 8 or 9 meters wide, working its way down. But then at that bottom there, that was the widest intercept to date on that section, where we had the 19.3 meters, and on the most conservative true width, that's sitting at least 12.5 meters wide down there at the bottom. It varies by section, but really, I mean, it's pretty consistent in that kind of, I mean, that's a pretty broad range, I guess, of 1 to 8 meters, but throughout most of the El Rubi, it's sitting there. And then what we also get away from that main El Rubi structure is we get high-grade stringer structures that run kind of a 0.5 meter to 1 meter that splay off and would come up kind of on a still fairly vertical, but moving towards the west. And then that takes us to the bottom of the pit with that 19 meters, and then we'll see moving forward what it looks like below that.
What's sort of the high priority here, Steve? Is it to hit that open zone, or is it to sort of chase the high grade El Rubi structure to get better definition?
I mean, to me right now, growing the open pit will be extreme. I mean, they're both extremely important. And I think what you're going to see is us, you know, as we move to the south, so we're looking at this image here, as we move to the south, we're going to be focusing on both. We're going to be focusing on, and a lot of this, I guess, will be more on the underground as we move south, but to the north there and focusing on that, we're going to be trying to expand the pit. And then if it continues to go deeper, we'll work on the underground there. But I think it's the combination of both. Obviously the resource, the bulk of it is the open pit, and at a very, very nice open pit heap leach grade. I wouldn't say one is more important than the other. I think we'll be focusing on both.
I would just comment, Steve, that it's probably important to really have a tight definition of that El Rubi zone, just to not bleed grade into your low grade zone when you're making a
Well, that's fair. Well, what happens too is that, I mean, we certainly have an understanding visually that we're in the El Rubi structure. But what does happen is we do have a very, oftentimes around the main, even the main El Rubi structure, never mind the broad western zone, which is separate. You get a halo, and you can see it on, I mean, just on the tracing of some of these holes that are coming down up here, that you get a halo around the high grade structures of the main El Rubi event. And if there with, you know, some of the work we're going to be doing moving forward is to see, you know, kind of core scanning and sorting to see if that is something that'll be very effective for this type of deposit, to separate, you know, that really high grade material from the broad low grade stuff. You know, we're going to do some metallurgy to see, and basically to show that you could recover the high grade gold and silver through a secondary circuit or a different circuit. Yeah, and like you say, we're really going to be trying to define the difference between the two, and you know, see if there's going to be benefits to that as far as when it comes to mining the project as well.
As you know well, at Dolores, you know, they built a small mill to process the high grade. You guys envisioning some sort of similar scenario?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's why I say our first step will be showing metallurgically that it can be done. But yeah, we've looked at some of the advancements that have been done at Dolores, and we're going to start to do some work to show the benefits of that here as well.
And then just on a different topic, has management, I see their ownership at 23%, a pretty high level, but question, have they been participating in your equity financings to maintain their proactive care?
Absolutely. And I think even more importantly than on equity raises. I mean, you can go look on SETI and you see Gary over the last 2 months, I think, put $200,000 into the open market buying the stock. So it's not just on the equity raises. We don't need to sit there and try and, put the money in to get, a warrant or anything associated with it. We believe in the asset, and when we have our money, we invest it and we buy in the open market as well.
Great. Artie, do you have some questions?
Thank you. Have you done metrological testing other than Rubi?
Sorry, I think, did you ask if you had some wicked feedback there? Was that about metallurgical testing other than Ruby?
Yeah, other than Rubi.
There has been a bit done, but our focus was on Ruby, and being that it was our kind of main event here. We will do some additional work on the historic area now that it's in their resource and showing that can be recovered at similar grades to what Ruby is.
Artie, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
You mentioned this, but which type of mineralization is more attractive for you to find?
Again, I think it's a combination of both. The broad low grade, certainly when we discovered our first was hole 245, when we were targeting potentially hitting some of those high grade stringers up on the western side, and then ended up hitting the 110 meters of over a gram or around a gram gold equivalent in that hole. That opened our eyes to the open pit potential of the deposit. But we're also very interested in the high grade Ruby structure and potentially finding more of that as well. So to me, it'll be the combination of both moving forward. I wouldn't say one is more important than the other. I think they complement each other, and ultimately having both will, just add to the value of the deposit and to the size of the mine when we get to that point.
And one last question is, when we look at the other gold, silver deposits in the region or similar type of deposits, where does your average grade stand?
I mean, my experience of looking at the open pit heap leach deposits in Mexico, the average grade is about a half gram gold equivalent, and not much in the silver way. If you bring our two grades together, in my opinion, we're sitting at least double what that average grade is. We've got about a half gram gold equivalent in silver grade, plus we're sitting at around that 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, depending which part of the resource you're looking at open pit wise. So to me, we're sitting well above what the average has been, and those deposits we're making, people will always focus on grade, and they'll try and compare it to something somewhere else in the world. But open pit heap leach mining is basic, in my opinion, the cheapest way to process there is on a large scale. And the deposits that exist in this state and in other states in Mexico that have been operating using 0.1, 0.2 cutoffs and average grades of 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 grams, some a little higher, but all under a gram for the most part. And they've been printing money back to $1,200 gold and making a lot of money doing it. So when people will say it's low grade, I mean, compare apples to apples, and I think we're sitting at something that is a very attractive grade, and that again has been the feedback we've received from the miners that are doing that type of mining, that are now being very interested in what we're working on here. People focus on grade, and you can look at something that's up in, say, Canada and be operating at 200 grams silver or something, or higher, but it's not economic, and it doesn't make sense because of the type of mining they're going to do with what the infrastructure spend would take to get to a lot of these. So there's a lot of factors that go into figuring out, how good a deposit is. But in this case, I would certainly start by trying to look at the other deposits in the state and in Mexico that do open heap leach mining and see how it compares. And I think you'll see that it compares very well.
Thank you, Steve. Campbell?
Sure. Do you have any plans to acquire more claims?
I mean, right now we're kind of in a lull in Mexico where you can't go and stake yourself. Just with COVID and the government offices shut down, it's not something that's been done. We would love to put another asset into the company potentially. Something early stage that would be, a spin out asset. We've seen the value in that in the past with other companies of ours, being able to basically give a free dividend out to shareholders of a new company with another asset, but something that I would love to have a secondary asset in the company, and our geologists and team have certainly been paying attention, and we'll wait for the one that we think is the right one at the right price for us to put it in. But that's definitely something that's been on our radar for a while, and look, we would love to have a secondary asset that's earlier stage that we could spin out.
Do you plan to test the gap between El Rubi and Macho Libre?
Very much. That's, we're working our way south right now with the drill rig, from the edge of the mineralization that's in the resource there, working our way down to where those two connect. But we'll be adding at least one rig that'll, here in the near future, that will be going around and starting to test our different models, not only at Macho Libre, but at La Colmena. At some point we'll retest the El Molino and looking at what we have there, Ruby North. There's a lot, and then other ones that we've identified that don't have a name yet. It's a very target rich project, and there's a lot of untested structures that have certainly shown anomalous results at surface in our geochem program that we will be doing some reconnaissance work on.
Are there other minerals like one often sees in Mexico?
We've been very low on the base metal front, other than that really high grade sample down at the bottom in hole 289, where we had 14% combined lead and zinc. That again, why I made the comment about how we have high grade at surface, and then 300 meters below it on the same structure, we still have high grade gold and silver. And if it was the traditional epithermal model, you would expect the gold and silver numbers to be falling off, base metal numbers to be picking up, and as you work your way down the system, eventually you get to just base metals. And we haven't seen that yet, and we've seen, barely anomalous lead, zinc, copper so far, other than down deep in that one particular sample that was only a half meter within a 19-meter wide high grade gold and silver zone. So I fully expected at some point. I don't know how deep we're gonna have to go to get into the base metals, but if we're still in a full intact precious metal system down for another 300 meters, or we get into another big system, then that's gonna bode well for our shareholders and the resource. But right now we haven't seen a lot of that. Up at Ruby North, you get a bit more copper. You can find some hand samples there that have some, you see the green staining on the rocks. And then as we get further north than that, we get up to the porphyry target that's La Gloria that we're not focused on, but there's a 3 kilometer by 3 kilometer wide porphyry target that we've looked at, and we're sitting, up in the very top of the leach cap environment of a porphyry, but we've seen some signature elements of moly and other things up in La Gloria. It's not our focus. We don't plan on plunging 1,000-meter holes blindly into a porphyry when we've got the success in what we're focused on here at El Rubi and hitting the high grade veins.
Estimated strip ratio of the conceptual open pit. Any idea?
I heard Dale ask this question last year, and we do not have that number yet, so I'm not going to answer that because I would be
sure.
Yes, but you'll see that, and we'll have more info on that as we work through the proper 43-1 report that we'll have filed here in the next 45 days. But I heard Dale give that answer, so I'm going to stick with his answer. That I'm not going to.
Here's another question you might not be able to answer either, but people ask them. So, any feeling yet whether you will be able to use run of mine ore on the potential heaps, or you'll have to crush? So, what would?
We're not at that stage yet. I would certainly be envisioning that it would have to go through a crushing circuit first and again, further metallurgy will dictate what the best size, crush size is to get the best recoveries. But yeah, that's forward looking. We're not quite there yet.
And speaking of forward, specific plans for the next 12 to 18 months, how much cash do you think you'll have to raise? So as we sort of start to wrap up, that's kind of a question for Catalyst too. So
yeah, obviously our focus is going to be expanding the deposit and trying to make new discoveries. We did about 25,000 meters of drilling last year on the deposit. all of that at El Rubi and the surrounding anomalies, but most of that right here, what you see on the screen. I would expect to do a minimum of that, but I would like to ramp up and do more than that this year. I would think that I know $10 million would be certainly a good starting point that would more than take us through a budget for the year and then some. But that's fluid, and it'll depend what our share price is at and when we do raises and how much we decide to do, and then based on success, if we make new discoveries on the project and start delineating those the same way we did at El Rubi, then we can go through money that much quicker, because we'll have 3 or 4 rigs turning or more, depending on discoveries and where we're focused on the drilling. But main catalyst is going to be expanding on this. I would expect to put out another resource at the latest in a year's time, as we expand upon El Rubi and other portions of the project. So that would be a catalyst coming. I know I've admired what Silvercrest did from the time they started their company, and their model after their first resource was kind of every 20 million silver equivalent ounces putting on a new resource. So if we think that we've added something like that, and then maybe we do resources at a quicker pace, but we'll see.
Great. Thank you everyone for tuning in. On your way out, please share your feedback. It'll be obvious. Just a little box pops up, a few lines, really appreciated, and we'll get its way to Steve very, very quickly. And thank you all for your great questions, for following the company. And with that, Steve, I'll pass it to you for a closing statement, and why you kind of answered it, but say it again in 2 sentences. Why buy now?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, obviously right off the bat, I think relative to the other silver companies with silver exposure out there, we're certainly undervalued relative to most, if not all, of the peer group I've looked at. I think that it'll take some time here for people to get a better understanding of this resource, but I think it's a great time to buy on the back end of that catalyst, and then moving forward, getting exposure to potentially additional discoveries and continuing to grow the deposit as it stands right now.
Great. And how's the best way to follow up with you or the company, Steve?
You can certainly send emails to info@silverviperminerals.com, or you can call us on our phone number at the office, 604-687-8566. And all that information is on the website as well, silverviperminerals.com. And we're always more than willing to take phone calls, answer emails, hop on Zoom videos now in this COVID world that we're in. We've become very versed with communicating with people all over the world, and it's actually been the one big positive I think that has come out of COVID, has been being able to communicate with people and all over the world in a given day. And I think it's actually made my job a lot busier than what it was necessarily even before.
No more weekends, no more vacations. It's just 24/7 connectivity. So, but
it drives my wife nuts, but it's okay. What we're doing, and like you said,
Amvest got a webinar for me, 6 a.m. Let's go. So, very good. Thanks everybody, and till we meet again. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Steve.